Welcome again to the 2024 Fall Town Hall. We've done this town hall event for a couple of years now. This is at least our second, if not third, fall town hall, and I really enjoy it because I get to connect with so many people and kind of give a rundown of what we've been up to, and also give a bit of a sneak peek into what we hope to be up to next year. So I'm going to talk to you today about three things. One is our approach to advocacy. Then I'm going to go over our key campaigns that we've landed on for the next 3 to 5 years. And then I'm going to give you a sneak peek. And in between the key campaigns and the sneak peek, we'll take a break for a little Q&A feedback session. I do have some notes. I'm going to have to rely on them. No shame in that. Approach to advocacy, yes. I got a little fancy with the animations, I have to say. I couldn't help myself. Approach to advocacy. So we do advocacy differently. When I first started CanWCC, it made sense to have an advocacy department. We are an advocacy organization. But about 2 years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago, we actually made the decision to scrap the advocacy department because, it created a silo, and then we had to then communicate advocacy to the rest of the team. And really what we did instead was to get rid of advocacy as a separate department, and then work really hard to integrate advocacy into everything that we do, who we are, all of our operations, all of our events, all of our other departments. And so that's been on our strat plan for years now. And our team, talks about this as a key strategic objective and a goal constantly, all the time. And really our mission as an organization and as a team is to create opportunities for collective community impact. Advocacy is, it's a bit of a stuffy word. Really what we want to do is focus on that community impact that we can achieve as a group. Why is this not working? Right. Community impact. So we refer to community impact as acts of advocacy, and we have a really broad definition of advocacy. So we embrace an inclusive approach that recognizes everyone's contribution to our advocacy effort, as well as the larger kind of movement towards economic and gender equity. So acts of advocacy certainly include the usual suspects, marching, signing petitions, writing to your elected official. Those are all certainly acts of advocacy. But there's also everyday acts of advocacy that we're all engaging in that don't get the same level of recognition and aren't always considered advocacy. But we really believe in that broader definition of advocacy. So joining CanWCC is an act of advocacy. Giving us feedback, telling us your stories, giving each other support, celebrating each other, supporting each other in good times and bad. That is contributing to this movement to advance gender and economic equity. You're part of this movement. simply starting and growing your business is a huge act of advocacy. Choosing to vote, and so many other things. So we see in our community all of these opportunities, and we want to recognize how everyone is engaging in advocacy, even if they didn't see that in themselves. And we want to make sure that we reinforce the notion that that they're participating simply by doing the things that they have been doing all along. So then what is our role? So the organization's role, our acts of advocacy, we work to collect that information that you're giving us, the feedback, the stories, and everything else from our community, and packaging that information, taking that information to policymakers. So we have that brand, the Chamber of Commerce brand, that gets us a seat at the table. It opens doors when we knock on it, and we're going to use that platform to take the information from our community and make sure that it gets to the ears of policymakers. And we also do the heavy lifting on the, writing policy paperwork, sending in pre-budget submissions, all of that traditional kind of lobbying, advocacy type work, I guess I'd say. Certainly don't expect you folks who are running businesses to have to contribute and write up pre-budget submissions. That's our job. But we do want your feedback so that we know what to write. So just an overview of what some of our acts of advocacy have been over the last 6 or 8 months. We released a report called Invisible Entrepreneurs. This was based on a project called The Alliance, which was a coalition of 12 organizations with vested interest in self-employed individuals. We prepared and submitted our annual pre-budget submission to the government that we've been doing every year. We partnered with an organization called the Better Way Alliance and had team members attend a lobby day at Ontario's Queen's Park. I appeared on the agenda with Steve Paikin to discuss entrepreneurship, and we partnered and were invited as a panelist at an event called X24, which sounds much more exciting than it was, to be honest. But it's the Entrepreneurship Exchange, and it was a group of entrepreneurship groups and small business groups and leaders and experts and all that got together from Canada, the US, and Mexico to talk about the issues of the day, mostly supply chain and the upcoming free trade agreement between the 3 countries. It was interesting. I take back what I said. It was interesting. And then most recently, I served as a witness and spoke to the House of Commons Standing Committee on International Trade. They're doing a special report on women's businesses and women-owned businesses in exporting. So that's a little bit about what we've been up to on the advocacy side. So the question is always, are we making an impact? Advocacy is a long game, and it's hard to know if we're making an impact because we don't see changes necessarily in the short term. So we have to rely on signals and proxies to tell us, are we on the right track? So one signal, let's say, is the pre-budget submission, right? The federal budget is a really important document in that it tells us what the federal government considers really the important issues, and it spends money on those issues. So submitting the pre-budget submission as an organization is important, and it also means that it gives us an opportunity to be called as a witness by the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance during their pre-budget consultations every year. So when we look at the organizations or the types of organizations that the Finance Committee calls to these pre-budget consultations over the last 10 years, they like to talk to chambers of commerce. There's not a single year that's gone by without them calling a chamber of commerce to speak at one of these consultations. In 2018, they called 15 different chambers of commerce to speak to them. They have called different women's organizations. The gold line here shows gender-based violence and childcare organizations that have been called over the years, flatlined in 2020, unfortunately. And one women's business organization in the last 10 years has been called to speak at a pre-budget consultation, and that's us. So when I'm feeling a little overwhelmed, this is the type of signal that that helps me feel like we're on the right track, and we are making an impact, even though those walls are hard to climb and they're steep. So from there, oh yeah, I put this quote here. So this is our approach to advocacy. CanWCC works to harness the power of the collective from the grassroots up to influence change at the systemic level from the government down. That pretty much encapsulates the strategy. So from there, why is it not working? Let's talk about key campaigns. So these are the key campaigns that we've landed on for the next 3 to 5 years. We decided on these issues. We selected them based on, member consultation, project work, and review by the team and our board of directors. We selected 3. And I'll go through each of them one by one. So the first one is support for self-employed individuals. 80% of women entrepreneurs, 50% of Black entrepreneurs, and 68% of Indigenous entrepreneurs are self-employed. And when you look at discussion around small business policy and eligibility around business programming, self-employed folks are often excluded or forgotten about, passed over. And so, there's a real chasm there for self-employed folks who want to become employers or SMEs to get from that self-employed point to the employer SME point. And at the same time, there's a real lack of recognition for self-employed folks who wish to remain self-employed or are self-employed by virtue of the type of work that they do. And so in our report, on invisible entrepreneurs that talked about self-employed individuals. We described them as an employer of one, which is important and relevant. And if all of the so 10% of Canadians' labor force is self-employed. If all of those folks decided tomorrow to say, you know what, forget about it, I'm going to go try to find a job in the labor force, the low unemployment rate that the government is so pleased with would not be, it would, the last time I made the calculation, it would go up to something like 18%. So they are truly employers of one, and they do contribute to the GDP, and they contribute in many other ways. So they deserve that recognition. They're doing valuable work. They're contributing to the economy. The best example, and the one I love to use, is of this is the Canada Digital Adoption Program. So this had two streams. The one stream that I'm going to talk about is a $2,400 micro grant that was made available to folks for essentially e-commerce expenses. And in order to be eligible for that $2,400, the business had to have at least one employee in addition to the owner. So what does that mean? It means 80% of women could not apply, 50% of Black entrepreneurs couldn't apply, and 68% of Indigenous entrepreneurs could not apply. Why? $2,400 could make such an impact on someone who is self-employed versus a company that has 50 employees. It just doesn't make any sense. Issue number 2, women-owned certification and access to supply chains. So anyone who has talked to me before on this issue knows I could talk all day about this, so I'll try to keep things a little brief. I'll say this about access to supply chains. The federal government has still not made a commitment to allocate a percentage of their procurement budget to women-owned suppliers. So since 2018, we have had in this country a women's entrepreneurship strategy and no commitment from that government to spend any percentage of their procurement budget on women-owned suppliers. So again, this does not compute for me. This doesn't make sense. When we talk about certification, in order to have access to certain, diversity, equity, advancement programs, okay, I'm willing to say that, we need some mechanism to certify a business is owned by an equity deserving group. Okay, I'll give you that. But women-owned certification, the way it stands now in terms of third-party certification, which is the only available mechanism, is extremely expensive. It's like $750 plus each year, every year. And so my question is, if the purpose of a DEI program is to advance equity, it's not actually a question, it's a statement, sorry. If the purpose of a DEI program is to advance equity, then it doesn't make sense to download the cost of that program onto the equity deserving group, right? We can't expect people to buy their way out of poverty. Like, it's never going to work. And so our recommendation is twofold. Number one, we need that commitment from the federal government and beyond. And secondly, we need alternative mechanisms to allow for low cost, dignified certification and or a refundable tax credit for those certification fees. Because if women-owned businesses are going to be required to pay those fees to be certified, they need to get that money back in their pocket by hook or by crook, I shall say. Okay, issue number 3. Why is this not working? All right, universal parental income support. So with the exception of Quebec, which has a parental income program that is available to self-employed individuals, the rest of Canada, the maternity and parental income support is coordinated and managed by the employment income legislation. So maternity and parental leave and income support is managed and coordinated in much the same way as what used to be called unemployment insurance. So under that act, although there are different regulations, different qualifying periods, different amounts for benefits, essentially, you know, maternity and parental leave and unemployment income support are analogous. Whereas if anyone has children, or if anyone who doesn't have children but has sat in a room with someone with a child, you know, you can understand that nothing could be less analogous to not having a job than being a parent. You know, like the two are, if you have a Venn diagram, those two circles could not be further apart. So having it analogous under the legislation creates a lot of problems. Problem number 1 is the Employment Insurance Act is only makes it only available to folks in the labor force or the traditional wage earner. So there's a lot of other people that get pregnant or become parents that aren't in the traditional labor force. And so what happens to them? What sort of support do we as a community provide to them, and how do they support themselves and their families? Issue number 2 is a philosophical issue. So if we as a group within, let's say, the women's movement or the feminist entrepreneurship movement are trying to advance our message that unpaid domestic work and care work is valuable, has value, and should be considered essential, valuable work, then having maternity leave analogous to being unemployed is a significant problem from a philosophical standpoint. It makes it very difficult to advance that message. And you could argue that, okay, but like people understand that it's different. This is just, you know, on paper. But it's not just on paper, because other legislation operationalizes that philosophical challenge. When you look at the RRSP legislation, maternity leave income is not considered earned income for RRSP purposes, just as unemployment insurance income is not considered earned income for RRSP purposes. So both of those streams of income aren't considered earned income for sheltered retirement savings. So you can see how these philosophical, kind of, maybe one could even say like, it's just for convenience, actually become operationalized and impact things like increased poverty among senior women. So yes, this is, I think, a huge issue, something that really needs to be addressed. And our recommendation is to take parental income support out from under the employment insurance legislation, to set it up as a standalone program that is funded by general tax revenues, and to have it have all parents be eligible for support under that program. So there we are.